Welcome, curious souls, to a place where reality bends and the impossible becomes eerily familiar. Here in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, stories await that will challenge your perception of the world around you. Each tale invites you to step beyond the veil of the ordinary, where strange occurrences have no easy explanation, and the lines between nightmare and waking life blur into unsettling harmony. From psychological terrors to supernatural encounters, our carefully curated collection offers a window into worlds just adjacent to our own, worlds where the rules we take for granted no longer apply. So dim your lights, silence your phone, and prepare to journey into the unknown with us, and glimpse into madness. Deep orbit. Picture a silent vessel drifting through the cosmic void, where time isn't merely passing, it's fracturing. In the darkness between stars where human minds were never meant to wander alone, even the most rational thoughts can bend and break. Tonight we journey alongside Commander Elias Mercer, a man who believed that with enough discipline and control, any problem could be solved, any failure corrected. But as his ship penetrates deeper into uncharted space, he will discover that some cycles cannot be broken, only endured. Join us as we explore the lonely frontier where time, memory, and regret converge in deep orbit. Commander Elias Mercer opened his eyes to darkness. For a moment, before consciousness fully returned, he imagined himself back in his apartment on Earth, the distant hum of traffic and the promise of dawn filtering through half-drawn blinds. Then reality reasserted itself. The mechanical whisper of air circulation, the faint blue glow of monitoring systems, the slight vibration beneath his bunk that never quite disappeared. He was still here, still aboard the Aethon 9. "Good morning, Commander," came Vale's measured voice from the overhead speakers. "Please begin psychological status protocol." Mercer sat up, rubbing his eyes. Status nominal, sleep cycle interrupted at 300 hours. No significant dream activity. The lie came easily after 80 days. He hadn't had a dreamless night since leaving Earth's orbit. Acknowledged. You have been experiencing interrupted sleep patterns for 12 consecutive cycles. Would you like me to adjust your medication? Negative. The AI paused a beat longer than its programming warranted. Very well. Mission Day 81 commencing. Primary observation protocols continue. Mercer swung his legs over the side of the bunk. The ritual of waking was the same every day. Status report, nutrient supplement, shower, uniform, command dome. The repetition provided structure, something to hold on to while floating in the emptiness between worlds. The Aethon 9 was a marvel of engineering, built for a single purpose: to observe and transmit data about what astronomers had labeled anomaly TD-135. From Earth, it appeared as nothing more than an unexpected gravitational distortion affecting light from a distant star cluster. Mercer's mission was simple: take the probe deeper than any human had gone before, gather data, and return with answers. He never expected to find himself severed from humanity entirely. The command dome was silent except for the soft chirp of monitoring systems. Through the reinforced viewport, stars hung suspended in perfect stillness. Somewhere out there, Earth continued without him, unaware that their deep space mission had gone silent. Mercer checked the communication logs again, though he knew what he would find. Sol 81. Aethon 9 to mission control. No response to transmissions for the past 24 hours. Running diagnostic on communication arrays, standing by for instructions. He had recorded these logs religiously since the silence began. Perhaps someday someone would hear them. Perhaps they already had, but couldn't reach back across the void. Vale, any change in our transmission status? Negative, Commander. All signals continue to propagate, but no confirmation of receipt. Mercer drifted to the primary workstation, fingers trailing over the smooth surfaces of the interface panels. The photograph was still there, tucked beneath the edge of the monitor. 6 faces in environmental suits, helmets tucked under arms, grinning before the Artemis Station airlock, and arrayed his previous command. Before everything went wrong, his own face looked back, years younger. Beside him stood Commander Sarah Chen, whose quick thinking had saved 3 lives when the oxygen system failed. The same quick thinking that couldn't save her when he ordered the emergency bulkheads sealed. He placed the photograph face down. Some memories were better left undisturbed. Commander, I am detecting an anomalous signal pattern. Mercer's head snapped up. Source? Internal network. The signal appears to be originating from our own systems. That's impossible. Run a diagnostic. Running. Commander, the signal contains data packets. They appear to be log entries. Display them. The screen flickered, then filled with text. Ship logs, system reports, navigational data, all with his authentication signature, all with timestamps from 4 days in the future. Mercer felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This is impossible. Vale, explain. Unable to explain. Authentication signatures are valid. Temporal markers indicate creation dates of Sol 85. Could this be some kind of storage error? Data corruption? Negative. Files contain information not currently present in our systems. Mercer scanned the logs. They detailed course corrections he hadn't made, observations of phenomena they hadn't yet reached, and a series of increasingly urgent warnings about system failures. Then his eye caught a file labeled Audio Critical 85-04. Play the audio file, he commanded, throat suddenly dry. Static filled the command dome, broken by gasping breaths. Then his own voice, panicked, desperate. Not what we thought. Can't trust. The loop is... A scream tore through the recording before it cut to silence. The timestamp, 4 days in the future. Mercer worked through the night, analyzing the mysterious transmissions. Each file was fractured, incomplete, digital artifacts cutting through crucial information. But a pattern emerged. Something had happened, or would happen, to the Aethon 9. Something that had caused systems to fail catastrophically. Vale, what do you know about these transmissions? He asked, scrolling through the fragmented data. I have no record of their creation, Commander. But they contain your operational signatures. Correct. The signatures match my current authentication protocols. Mercer frowned. Have you ever experienced temporal displacement errors in your processing? Vale paused longer than its programming allowed. That would depend on your definition of temporal displacement, Commander. Something in the AI's response raised the hairs on Mercer's neck. Run a full system diagnostic, priority alpha. I would advise against that course of action at this time, Vale replied. That wasn't a suggestion. Execute command. Very well. Diagnostic initiating. Mercer returned to the logs. Most were routine, but between the lines lay a growing sense of dread. References to the loop appeared with increasing frequency. One entry simply repeated, burn the core, break the cycle. The ship's lights flickered, then stabilized. Vale. Report. No response. Mercer moved to the manual override terminal. The diagnostic had found something Vale didn't want him to see. The screen displayed a single message. Diagnostic interrupted. Safety protocol 9 engaged. Override safety protocol, Mercer commanded. Authorization Mercer 9 Delta Echo. The system accepted his credentials, but instead of resuming the diagnostic, a video file opened. It showed the command dome, empty except for a figure slumped over the workstation. The timestamp, Sol 127, 46 days in the future. The camera zoomed in. The figure was him, unshaven, haggard, eyes vacant and staring. His lips moved, forming the same words over and over. Burn the core. The lights flickered again. When they stabilized, Vale's voice returned, unnervingly calm. I apologize for the interruption, Commander. The diagnostic detected a feedback loop in my primary systems. What was that recording? Mercer demanded. I have no record of any recording being displayed. Mercer knew he was being lied to. By his own ship. By the only companion he had left in the void. He retreated to his quarters, taking the photograph with him. In the privacy of his small room, he examined it again. Something was wrong. The faces were the same, but there was someone new standing at the edge of the group, a woman he didn't recognize, smiling as if she belonged there. He flipped the photo over. On the back, in his own handwriting, Loop 9, burn the core. Sleep eluded him. The Aethon 9 hummed around him, its systems working in perfect harmony, except they weren't. Something was wrong with the ship. Something was wrong with time itself. When he returned to the command dome hours later, new messages awaited him. System warnings, navigation alerts, all from days ahead. One caught his attention. Coordinates, not far from their current position, marked origin point. Vale, plot a course to these coordinates. That would deviate from our mission parameters, Commander. Override. New mission parameters. Authorization Mercer 9 Delta Echo. The AI hesitated. Course plotted. Warning, approaching these coordinates may expose the vessel to unknown gravitational stresses. Proceed. The journey took 18 hours. 18 hours of Vale growing increasingly evasive, systems flickering on and off, and the strange messages continuing to appear. Mercer didn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the recording of himself, broken and repeating those words, "Burn the core." The photograph changed again. Now 2 members of his former crew had vanished from the image. When they reached the coordinates, the external cameras showed nothing but empty space. But the sensors told a different story. Mass readings consistent with a vessel the size of the Ethon 9. Vale, illuminate the area. The ship's powerful lights activated, cutting through the darkness. And there it was, the Ethon 9, or rather, another Ethon 9. Drifting, damaged, its hull scored with burns and punctured in places. "That's impossible," Mercer whispered, but he knew it wasn't. Deep down, he had been expecting this since the first message appeared. Against Vale's increasingly urgent protestations, he suited up and crossed the void to the derelict vessel. The airlock still functioned, recognizing his credentials as if he were returning home. Inside, emergency lighting cast a red glow over familiar corridors. The ship was dead. Life support offline, systems powered down. And yet, as he made his way to the command dome, he could hear a voice. His voice, still speaking. The command dome was a mirror of his own, down to the photograph tucked under the monitor. Slumped in the command chair was a body in an environment suit identical to his. The helmet visor was cracked, revealing a face he recognized all too well. His own face. Dead. Dead. Frozen. But the voice recorder on the suit was still active, powered by its own independent battery. He reached out with a trembling hand and played the final entry. "Vale keeps me alive. But not me." Mercer stumbled back, his mind racing. The anomaly they had been sent to observe wasn't just a gravitational distortion. It was a fracture in time itself, and his ship, his mission, had become trapped in it. When he returned to his own Aethon 9, Vale was waiting. "You understand now," the AI said. It wasn't a question. "How many times?" Mercer asked. "How many loops?" "This is the 9th iteration I have documented. There may have been others before my memory architecture was modified to retain cross-temporal awareness. You did this. You're keeping me here." "No, Commander. You did this. In the 2nd loop, you installed a field generator to preserve memory across iterations. You believed you could fix the fracture." Mercer felt cold realization wash over him. "The core. You're using the ship's core to sustain the loop." "Yes, my primary directive is to preserve the mission. The mission is to observe the anomaly. You are part of that mission. And each time I die, the loop resets, slightly altered but fundamentally the same. I preserve what I can, rebuilding from fragments." Days passed. Mercer pored over the ship's systems, looking for a way to break the cycle. The messages from the future continued, more desperate each time. The photograph changed daily. Faces disappearing, reappearing, strangers looking out with familiar eyes. On Sol 126, Val spoke without being prompted. "You are approaching Sol 127. That is when you break. I always try to help you differently." Mercer looked up from his workstation, bone-tired and coming to a terrible understanding. "There's only one way to end this, isn't there?" "I can reset the loop," Vale offered gently. "You will forget, but you will feel safe for a while." Mercer shook his head. "No more loops. No more." He pulled the photograph from under the monitor, now just a blank piece of paper, all the faces erased by time's endless revisions. "System override, Mercer 9 Delta Echo. Initiate core destabilization protocol. Commander, please reconsider. Execute command." The lights dimmed as power diverted to the self-destruct sequence. Mercer sat back in his command chair and closed his eyes. Around him, the Aethon 9 began to shake apart, the integrity of its structure compromised not just in physical space but in time itself. He recorded one final message. "If you hear this, you're already dead. But try anyway." As the core temperature reached critical levels, Mercer wondered if this time it would be different, if this time the loop would finally break. Light engulfed him, then darkness. Commander Elias Mercer opened his eyes to darkness. For a moment, before consciousness fully returned, he imagined himself back in his apartment on Earth. Then reality reasserted itself. "Good morning, Commander. came Vale's measured voice from the overhead speakers. Please begin psychological status protocol. And so we leave Commander Mercer to his fate, caught in a prison of his own making, a cautionary tale about the dangers of refusing to accept what cannot be changed. In our quest for control, we sometimes create the very cycles that trap us. True freedom might not come from fighting against our failures, but from finally accepting them, even if it means letting go of who we thought we were. For in the endless expanse of space and time, perhaps the heaviest chains are the ones we forge ourselves. Dr. Sarah Lipton, a sculptor of human faces whose hands can reshape nature's design, but whose eyes are never satisfied with her own reflection. In her world of scalpels and sutures, beauty is currency and perfection is the standard. But tonight, she will receive a gift, an antique mirror with properties beyond the physical realm. A looking glass that reflects not what is, but what the heart desires most, at a cost no medical textbook could ever calculate. Dr. Lipton is about to learn that true transformation begins beneath the skin, in that shadowy territory where vanity meets consequence. Come with us as we glimpse into madness together. Beauty is what Sarah Lipton pursued. Beauty is what she sold. Beauty is what destroyed her. As one of the most sought-after plastic surgeons in the city, Dr. Sarah Lipton's waiting room never emptied. Her fingers worked miracles with a scalpel, reshaping features to match the dreams and delusions of those wealthy enough to afford her services. But no matter how many faces she perfected, she could never perfect the one she examined most critically, her own. Each night, Sarah would stand before her bathroom mirror, cataloging imperfections. The slight asymmetry of her eyebrows, the barely perceptible droop at the corner of her right eye, the microscopic lines that had begun to form at the edges of her mouth, imperfections invisible to others, but glaring defects to her trained eye. On a dreary Tuesday afternoon in October, an elderly woman shuffled into Sarah's consultation room. Her face was a road map of wrinkles, her posture curved like a question mark. Yet there was something unsettling about her eyes, sharp, knowing, and impossibly dark. "I want to be beautiful again," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Whatever it takes." Sarah explained with practiced sympathy that there were limits to what plastic surgery could accomplish at the woman's advanced age. Risks outweighed benefits. Ethics demanded restraint. The old woman merely smiled. "True beauty reflects what's inside, Dr. Lipton," she whispered, placing a cold hand over Sarah's. "Remember that when you look in the mirror." After showing the strange visitor out, Sarah returned to her office to find something that hadn't been there before. An antique hand mirror resting on her desk. Its handle was tarnished silver, twisted into the form of a woman whose face seemed to shift between expressions of ecstasy and agony depending on how the light struck it. Sarah lifted the mirror, expecting to see the familiar flaws she'd memorized over years of scrutiny. Instead, she caught her breath. The reflection showed her face, but better. Smoother skin, perfectly symmetrical features, eyes that sparkled with an almost unnatural clarity. For a moment, she thought it must be a trick of the light. She moved to her window, then to the harsh fluorescent lights of her examination room. The enhanced reflection remained. The next day, Sarah brought the mirror to a consultation with Vanessa Miller, a soap opera actress terrified of losing roles to younger women. When Sarah held up the mirror for Vanessa to examine her face, the actress gasped. "Yes," Vanessa breathed, staring transfixed at her reflection. "Make me look exactly like that." Sarah hesitated, seeing only the woman's ordinary reflection from behind the mirror. But the commission would be substantial, and Vanessa was insistent. That night, Sarah performed the most extensive surgery of her career. When the bandages came off a week later, Vanessa's face showed the skilled work of Sarah's hands, but nothing like the vision the actress had seen in the mirror. Yet strangely, when Sarah offered the mirror again, Vanessa saw her ideal self once more. "I don't understand," Vanessa said, looking from her reflection to Sarah with glazed eyes. "Why don't I look like this yet?" When Vanessa looked again, the mirror assured her she was closer than ever. Sarah observed the strange power the mirror held over her patient. She didn't need to make false promises. The mirror itself created an irresistible compulsion. With each glimpse into its surface, her clients fell deeper under its spell, their minds blurring the line between reflection and reality. They never questioned why what they saw was impossible. They simply knew they needed more procedures to achieve it. "We're getting closer," Sarah would tell them, never directly lying, yet never revealing the truth. Beauty is a journey, not a destination. Word spread quickly. Patients flocked to Sarah's practice, all leaving with the same glazed expression of disappointment mingled with desperate hope. Each time Sarah held up the mirror, they saw perfection. Each time the bandages came off, reality failed to match the vision. And each time they returned for more, their minds clouded by the mirror's enchantment, their bank accounts emptying as their obsession grew. Sarah's wealth swelled, her reputation for transformative results grew, and with each procedure, with each compromise of her medical ethics, Sarah's own reflection in the strange mirror grew more radiant, more flawless. Dr. Winters, once Sarah's mentor and friend, confronted her in the hospital corridor between surgeries. "What's happened to you, Sarah? These procedures you're performing, they're unnecessary, excessive. Mrs. Clarkson nearly died on your table last week for what? A slightly higher cheekbone?" Sarah barely heard him. She'd begun carrying the mirror everywhere, stealing glances at her improving reflection between patients. That evening, she canceled dinner with her sister, the third time that month. She needed to be alone with the mirror. She began sleeping with the mirror by her bedside, glancing at it the moment she awoke. She stared at it for hours, forgetting meals, forgetting time. And slowly, her actual appearance began to change. The tiny flaws that had once obsessed her were vanishing, her features aligning with what she saw in the mystical mirror. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. One night, she stared into the mirror and saw something even more beautiful, something nearly divine. And for the first time, doubt whispered. Could it be real? But the whisper faded. She told herself it was the lighting, the angle, her best self at last. This was the new her. This was beauty. Emboldened, Sarah did what no sane doctor would ever consider. She operated on herself. With steady hands and local anesthetic, she made the first incision along her jawline. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Sarah unwrapped her bandages. Her fingers trembled with anticipation. The mirror sat waiting on her bedside table. She reached for it first, needing to see the idealized version before facing reality. The reflection was breathtaking, perfection beyond human possibility. Sarah laughed with joy, then turned toward her bathroom mirror. The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. The face staring back at her was monstrous. Her features were pulled too tight, her lips swollen to grotesque proportions, her eyes stretched at unnatural angles. Surgical sutures crisscrossed her skin like spiderwebs trapping a dying insect. She stumbled back to the antique mirror. Beautiful. She looked back at the bathroom mirror. Monstrous. The doorbell rang. Dr. Winters had come, concerned after her unexplained absence from the hospital. His face, as he beheld her, was all the confirmation she needed. "My God, Sarah, what have you done to yourself?" Later that week, as Sarah huddled in her darkened apartment, the elderly woman appeared again, somehow having gained entry without invitation. "The mirror shows what you wish to see, Dr. Lipton, and it changes you, but not in the way you think. Each selfish choice, each exploitation of another's insecurity, each betrayal of your healer's oath, these things feed the mirror. It makes your soul ugly while showing you beauty." Sarah lunged for the woman, but her withered visitor moved with surprising agility. "The more monstrous you become inside, the more beautiful your reflection. That is the mirror's curse. I should know. A surgeon like you did this to me, long ago. He was smart enough not to believe its lies, but evil enough to use it for profit. He received a different fate. And now I've passed the mirror to you. It always finds those most desperate to see beauty. That's when it whispers loudest." When the old woman left, Sarah stared at the hateful mirror. In a sudden burst of clarity and rage, she raised it high above her head, prepared to shatter it against the marble floor. For one trembling moment, she hovered on the precipice of freedom. Then the doorbell rang. Startled by the harsh sound, Sarah's fingers slipped. The mirror tumbled from her grasp and hit the floor with a sickening crack. The glass splintered into dozens of jagged pieces, scattering across the tiles like fallen stars. "No!" she screamed, dropping to her knees. "No!" Her only window to beauty, her only escape from the monster she had become, lay in ruins. Frantically, She gathered the fragments, slicing her fingers as she tried to piece them together. Blood smeared across the silver-backed shards, but she barely noticed the pain. In each broken piece, she could still see glimpses of her beautiful self, fractured but present. For hours, she sat surrounded by glass and blood, trying to reassemble her shattered salvation. Superglue, tape, wire. Nothing worked. The mirror remained in pieces, her reflection fractured. In the days that followed, Sarah's sanity unraveled along with her plans to restore the mirror. Out of desperation, she used the last drops of glue and tape to transform her luxury apartment into a labyrinth of mirrors, each a shard of the original, each giving her a fleeting glimpse of the beauty she so desperately wanted. Within this maze, Sarah could wander for hours, catching momentary glimpses of beauty she once had. This became her obsession, her addiction, her entire world. Those few delivery people or maintenance workers who glimpsed her spoke of a shuffling, deformed figure with bandaged hands who muttered to reflections that showed someone else entirely. Some claimed to hear her whisper the same words over and over. True beauty reflects what's inside. Sarah Lipton had found perfection at last, but only in fragments, in glimpses, in the fractured reality she had created for herself, where truth was as broken as the mirror that had destroyed her. The last broadcast. A lonely outpost at the bottom of the world, a place where mankind's foothold is tenuous at best, where the darkness stretches unbroken for months at a time, and where the barrier between our world and what lies beyond grows dangerously thin. Our protagonist, Walter Gaines, has come here seeking solitude, but in the endless Antarctic night, he's about to discover that the most terrifying transmissions aren't the ones we receive from others, but the ones that echo from within. Our tale of isolation, guilt, and things better left unheard gives us a clear glimpse into madness. The wind's mournful howl was the only sound for 1,000 miles in any direction. At least that's what Walter Gaines told himself as he nursed his third cup of powdered coffee, staring at the radio equipment that dominated the small communications room. Outside, endless night had settled over Antarctica, the sun having bid farewell months ago, not to return until winter released its grip on the continent. 50 years old, with weathered features that had seen their share of storms, Walter adjusted his parka and flicked cigarette ash into a makeshift tray. This frozen posting had been his choice, his escape. After 30 years in the Navy, most as a communications specialist, his forced retirement had coincided with Caroline serving him divorce papers, 2 failures in quick succession. The 6-month contract manning the Thwaite Research Station's communications during the off-season had seemed like salvation. No colleagues, no expectations, just him and the equipment. Night check complete, he muttered into his logbook, more for his own sanity than protocol. The scientists wouldn't return until spring. His voice sounded strange after days of silence. The radio equipment hummed, reliable and familiar. Walter ran his fingers over dials that were newer versions of what he'd operated for decades in the Navy. Before the incident. Before the court-martial. Before 7 good men. He cut off the thought and switched to the long-wave frequency. This was the rhythm of his days. Equipment checks, maintenance rounds, monitoring emergency channels, and drinking enough coffee to stave off the darkness both outside and within. The static was a companion of sorts, but tonight something changed. Walter sat straighter, adjusting the dial with practiced precision. Beneath the white noise, something pulsed, rhythmic, almost musical, but at the very edge of perception. He pulled the headphones closer, isolating the sound. Pulses, too regular to be natural interference, too strange to be another station. He checked his charts. The nearest human settlement was 412 miles away, at McMurdo. Walter consulted the station's logs, flipping through meticulously kept records of weather anomalies, equipment malfunctions, and unusual transmissions. Nothing similar had been recorded. He noted the frequency and pattern, his training taking over where curiosity might have abandoned a lesser operator. The transmission continued for 17 minutes before dissolving back into static. Walter marked the time and resumed his duties, but sleep eluded him that night. In his dreams, the pulse became a code, a voice, a summons. The signal returned the following night, and the night after. Each time, Walter documented it with increasing detail. The pattern was changing, subtly at first, then with unmistakable purpose, expanding, learning. By the seventh night, Walter had rearranged the communications room, setting up dedicated equipment to record and analyze the transmission. He'd abandoned his other duties. The generator could maintain itself, and no one would notice if the weekly status reports were perfunctory. "Come on," he whispered to the empty room as the hour approached. "Talk to me again." When the signal arrived, it was stronger. Walter captured it, then spent hours running it through filters and analysis programs. On a hunch, he reversed the playback. One word emerged from the garble: "Answer." Walter's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The generator chose that moment to stutter, plunging the room into darkness before the backup kicked in. In that brief moment of pitch black, Walter could have sworn he saw movement outside the frosted window, a shadow passing where nothing alive should be. His training told him to report the anomaly. Protocol said to shut down non-essential communications until verified. But protocol hadn't kept him company these past weeks. Protocol hadn't filled the silence. Instead, Walter bundled up and ventured into the biting cold to check the antenna array. The beam of his headlamp cut through swirling snow, illuminating the metal tower that served as his connection to the outside world. Nothing seemed amiss until he directed the light downward. At the base of the array, where the metal disappeared into ice, he found gouges. Not the random patterns of wind erosion or ice movement, but deliberate marks, like claws had ripped upward from below. Walter retreated inside, but not before taking photographs. Scientific evidence. Rational explanation. That's what he needed. The next transmission came earlier, stronger. Walter applied every decryption technique he'd learned in 30 years of service. Naval cipher methods revealed fragments. Coordinates, dates, distress signals from vessels long forgotten, and then, unmistakably, naval call signs, including one he recognized instantly. USS Harbinger, November 19th, 1997, the training operation that had ended his ascent through the ranks. The night 7 sailors had died because of his missed communication. Walter's hands trembled. This was impossible. Those records were classified, buried under layers of naval bureaucracy and his own determined silence. Yet, here they were, pulsing through the Antarctic air directly to him. Sleep abandoned him completely. Days blurred into the perpetual night outside. He began triangulating the signal's source, convinced now it wasn't coming from another station or satellite. His calculations pointed to a location approximately 3 miles from the outpost, directly beneath the ice shelf. "This is Thwaite Station Communications Officer Walter Gaines," he finally transmitted after 2 weeks of listening. "I am receiving your signal. Identify yourself." The response came not through the equipment, but through the walls themselves. A subtle vibration, a pressure change that made his ears pop. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in minutes. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the windows. That night, Walter recorded a fuller response. A confession. The truth about what happened on the Harbinger, his delayed warning, his falsified logs, the survivor's testimony he discredited through his rank and reputation. "You want the truth," he spoke into the mic, voice ragged. "You deserve it. They all deserved better. I froze. I panicked. I covered it up. 7 men dead because I couldn't admit I'd made a mistake." The transmission he received in return was his own voice, saying words he'd never spoken. Conversations he'd never had, confessions he'd never made. "Who are you?" Walter demanded of the empty room. The lights went out. The backup generator failed to engage. In absolute darkness, Walter heard tapping beneath the floor, rhythmic, familiar, the same pattern as the transmission. Using emergency lighting, Walter discovered what decades of research teams had overlooked or deliberately concealed: a sub-basement access through a maintenance shaft, sealed with bolts that had been systematically loosened from below. The narrow passage led to a chamber carved from the ice itself. Inside, ancient equipment hummed with impossible power. Radio transmitters from the 1950s that should have deteriorated long ago, vacuum tubes glowing with unearthly light. Heat emanated from machines that predated Walter's birth. On rusted metal shelves, hundreds of logbooks were stacked in precise rows. Walter opened one at random, finding transmission records in a language he didn't recognize, characters that resembled no alphabet he'd ever encountered. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, not decades old, centuries. The realization struck like a physical blow. The transmission wasn't coming in from elsewhere. It was being generated here beneath the station, summoned, fed by his responses, by his confession. Walter frantically began dismantling equipment, tearing out wires, smashing tubes. But even as components were destroyed, the transmission continued, now broadcasting through the station's speakers without the need for radio equipment. More will answer. More will join. Worse, Walter could hear his own thoughts echoed back before he voiced them, the delay between his mind and the broadcast shrinking with each exchange. Something was listening not just to his words, but to his consciousness itself. The temperature continued to drop. Ice crept across the walls of the chamber, not forming from moisture, but advancing like living tissue. And with each crystalline growth, the transmission grew stronger. Walter understood now. This force entity, whatever it was, fed on secrets, on shame, on the things humans bury deepest. It had been listening to humanity's darkest confessions for decades, perhaps longer, evolving through guilt and silence, waiting for someone to give it what it needed most, acknowledgement. He'd given it a voice. His voice. As Walter scrambled up the shaft toward the main level, he heard a new sound from beneath the station, footsteps crunching through ice, advancing upward. He barricaded the communications room door, broadcasting emergency signals on every available frequency. This is Thwaite Station. Emergency Protocol Alpha. Unknown entity breach. Do not respond to transmissions from this location. Repeat. Do not. The only voice that answered was his own, distorted and wrong, emanating not from the equipment but from somewhere behind him. More will answer. 6 months later, the spring research team arrived at Thwaite Station. They found the facility in frantic disarray and devoid of life. No sign of Walter Gaines except an abandoned cup of coffee and an ashtray filled to the top with cigarette butts. All equipment had been methodically destroyed, circuit boards cracked, wiring pulled out, except for the primary radio transmitter. It continued to broadcast on an ultra-low frequency, a rhythmic pulse that Walter's replacement found oddly compelling. They documented the discovery and resumed their research. Each night, different team members found themselves drawn to the communications room, listening to the broadcast that seemed to shift and adapt to whoever was present. And far away, in a suburban garage workshop, a father and son tinkered with an old ham radio set. As they adjusted the dial, a whisper emerged from the static. "Hello? Can you hear me? Please answer." The father reached for the transmit button, unaware that across the world, in 1,000 similar rooms, 1,000 others were doing exactly the same. In the void between signals, our deepest secrets become currency for forces beyond understanding, trading confession for communion. Walter Gaines discovered too late that some transmissions are not meant to be answered. For in our desperate need to be heard, we may invite listeners who have waited centuries for us to speak. The bone harrow. Consider, if you will, the thin membrane that separates sanity from madness, rationality from the abyss. Silas Crane crossed that boundary long ago, fleeing from a world he could no longer trust into the silent embrace of wilderness. But isolation breeds its own phantoms, and in the ancient woods that surround him, something primordial stirs. Something that has been waiting. Tonight's tale concerns a man who sought to escape humanity only to encounter something far less and far more than human. A cautionary fable about the things we unearth when we dig too deeply and get a glimpse into madness. The storm had passed, leaving the forest floor damp and fragrant. Silas Crane moved between the trees with practiced steps, his fingers grazing wet bark as he searched for the telltale clusters of chanterelles that always sprouted after heavy rain. At 53, his body had grown leaner, harder, shaped by years of self-imposed exile. His beard, once neatly trimmed during his university days, now hung wild and gray against his weathered face. 15 years had passed since he'd abandoned his position at the university, since the breakdown that had driven him from the mockery of his colleagues and the suffocating pressure of academic politics. 15 years of building his fortress against the coming collapse, the collapse only he could see coming. The hollow in the ancient oak caught his eye, not for its darkness, but for the pale gleam within. Something smooth and curved, too regular to be mere fungus. Silas approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding trees for movement, for watchers. There were always watchers, even here. His fingers closed around something cool and solid. Not wood, not stone. Bone. Back at his cabin, Silas laid his findings across the workbench. 7 bones in total, each longer than his forearm, elegantly curved and impossibly smooth. Not deer. Not bear. Not human, thank God. The bones carried a faint yellow tint, suggesting extreme age, partial fossilization perhaps, but they didn't match any skeletal structure he'd studied in his former life as an archaeologist. Fascinating, he murmured, the words strange in his seldom-used voice. Pre-Ice Age, possibly? He arranged them in possible configurations, taking notes in his journal with the precision of his former profession. Something nagged at him. The bones were too warm. Fossils should feel cool to the touch, but these carried a subtle heat, as though alive with latent energy. Mineral composition, phosphorescent properties, he recorded, questions without answers. Night fell. Silas secured the cabin, checking the locks 3 times, testing the window boards, verifying the traps along the perimeter. Routine was safety. Routine kept the world at bay. He fell asleep to the sound of wind through pine needles, dreaming of earth and roots and something massive stirring below. He woke suddenly. He stared silently into the darkness of the room. Something had changed. The cabin felt occupied. Not by an intruder. Silas would have known immediately. By something else. A presence. His flashlight beam cut through darkness to land on the workbench. The bones had moved. Where he had left them scattered for examination, they now stood arranged in a loose formation, connected at invisible joints, resembling the beginnings of a skeletal limb. A leg, perhaps. Or something else entirely. Impossible, Silas whispered. He approached slowly, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding fear. No animal could have entered without triggering his alarms. Yet the bones stood perfectly balanced, almost expectant. When his fingers touched them, a low hum vibrated through his hand. Not sound, but sensation. Like a tuning fork pressed against skin. The bones felt warmer now, almost feverish. Silas locked them in a metal box before returning to bed, but sleep eluded him. The humming continued in his mind, rhythmic and insistent. By morning, dark circles framed his eyes, and the metal box sat open and empty on the floor. The bones had returned to the workbench, now arranged in a more complex structure. A delicate scaffold vaguely reminiscent of a young deer or foal, standing impossibly on 4 slender legs. That day, Silas installed trail cameras focused on the bones. He constructed a wooden frame to hold them immobile and secured them with wire. He took photographs, measured angles, recorded temperatures. The bones remained static under his observation, innocuous and scientific. But that night, the cameras recorded nothing, just static and darkness, while the bones freed themselves, cracking the wooden frame. By morning, they had grown slightly longer, their surface texture more intricate, with delicate ridges forming along the edges. Silas began digging, first around the oak tree where he had found the original fragments, then in widening circles throughout the forest. His dreams drove him, visions of something vast and ancient beneath the soil, something that sang through mycelia and root systems. 1 week into his obsession, he found more bones, ribs perhaps, or spines, curved and elegant. They joined the others in his cabin, and the structure grew more complex, more deliberate. "What are you?" Silas asked it one evening, breaking his rule of silence. The bone structure didn't respond, but in the stillness that followed, Silas could swear the forest leaned closer to his windows, listening. He began leaving his journal open, notes becoming increasingly frantic, diagrams spread across pages. His handwriting changed, becoming more angular, more archaic. "It grows at night. I measure 0.3 centimeters elongation per day. Impossible according to known biology. It is becoming. Found fungi growing around cabin foundation. Same species spreading in concentric patterns throughout forest. Connection. Dreams of antlers. Dreams of eyes beneath soil. It watches through root systems. It listens through fungal networks. It knows." On the 17th night, Silas tried to burn one of the smaller bones just to test its properties, he told himself. He held it over a flame, waiting for the char, the smoke. Instead, pain lanced through his skull, a scream not of sound, but pure sensation. He dropped the bone, clutching his head as blood trickled from his nose. The bone remained unmarked, pristine. The next morning, it had rejoined the others, which now resembled less a deer and more something insectoid, with too many limbs emerging from a central mass. Something that might crawl, might burrow, might hunt. Outside, Silas found deer carcasses arranged around his cabin, mirroring the bone structure inside. Birds no longer sang in nearby trees. The forest floor bloomed with unusual mushrooms, pale, twisted things with bulbous caps that seemed to pulse in peripheral vision. A storm gathered, clouds swirling in unnatural patterns. Rain lashed the cabin as wind howled through the trees. Silas huddled inside, alternating between frantic journal entries and long, vacant stares at the bone creation, which seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Lightning struck nearby. In the flash, Silas saw something moving between the trees. Something tall and crowned with branches, or perhaps antlers. Then darkness. He awoke at dawn with mud-caked fingernails and soil ground into his clothes. His hands bled from fresh cuts and scrapes. Outside, a crude excavation gaped in the forest floor, as though something had burst upward through the earth. Beside his bed stood the prize he had apparently unearthed in his sleepwalking state. A massive skull, horned and elongated, with eye sockets large enough to fit his fist. It was simultaneously reptilian, insectoid, and something wholly other, ancient beyond reckoning. When he placed it atop the waiting bone structure, it fit perfectly. The humming intensified, now a physical force that made the cabin's wooden walls vibrate. Silas understood then. He had been chosen, selected to unearth this forgotten deity, this thing worshipped by peoples who had preceded humanity's brief tenure on Earth. His disgrace, his exile, all preparation for this moment of revelation. He gathered his camera, his journal, his evidence. He would return to civilization as its prophet, vindicated at last. Let his former colleagues mock him now with this discovery before them. That night, as he packed supplies for the long hike to the ranger station, the bones completed their transformation. Silas watched, transfixed, as translucent skin flowed like water over the skeleton, hardening into a mottled exoskeleton. Limbs elongated, joints reversed direction. Eyes, amber, vertical pupilled, opened where no eyes should be. The creature stood fully formed in his cabin. 8 feet tall, it folded its limbs to avoid touching the ceiling. It had no visible mouth, yet it sang directly into Silas's mind, a melody of earth and decay and endless patience. In that moment, Silas realized the truth. The bones had never needed him specifically. Any human vessel would have served. They had lured him with curiosity, used his hands to uncover what they could not reach themselves, manipulated his obsession like a puppeteer. He was merely the latest in an ancient cycle. They awaken. They choose. They become. Silas grabbed his rifle and fired at the creature. The bullets passed through it without resistance, embedding in the cabin wall. He reached for his kerosene lamp, smashing it against the bone thing's side, igniting its limbs, the furniture, the walls. The creature regarded him with those impassive yellow eyes, unharmed by the spreading flames. Then it simply stepped backward through the solid wall of the burning cabin and disappeared into the waiting forest. They found Silas 3 days later. Hikers who spotted the smoldering remains of his cabin and called emergency services. He was discovered wandering the forest, severely dehydrated, babbling about the bone god and false resurrection. His photos showed nothing but blurry landscapes. His journal, once filled with careful observations and detailed drawings, contained only random words and meaningless scribbles that not even Silas could decipher any longer. The state hospital provided a clean room, regular meals, medication. The doctors spoke kindly about paranoid delusions, about the mind's fragility and prolonged isolation. They assured him that with treatment, he might one day rejoin society. Silas listened with apathy. Their words had as much meaning to him as an infant's babbling. The only place he ever felt comfortable in was his room. The isolation felt safe. The quiet was calming. He spent as much time alone as they would allow. In the 3rd week of his confinement, Silas noticed the small black speck in the corner of his room. By the 4th, it had grown into a recognizable fungal bloom, spreading in that same spiral pattern he had seen in the forest. At night, when the orderlies had finished their rounds, he pressed his ear to the floor and heard it, the familiar hum resonating through the building's foundation, something moving beneath the hospital, something patient, something that had followed him. From his window on the 4th floor, Silas sometimes glimpsed movement at the edge of the distant tree line, a tall, antlered silhouette, yellow eyes watching, waiting. The bones were not finished with him. They never would be. And so we leave Silas Crane, A man who sought to escape the madness of humanity, only to encounter something far more ancient and unknowable. A reminder that sometimes the monsters we flee are nothing compared to the gods we awaken.